Good afternoon. This is Mike Regan, and I am honored to bring you this special event. And just to kind of set up the framework here at TranzAct, we've got a bunch of people joining us, and we'll make it available via recording. But just to set the background for you, a good friend of mine is a gentleman by the name of Steve Herman. And Steve and I have been very active in Young Presidents Organization and are in fact in a forum together. And Steve has periodically brought me some great opportunities which help me understand the vital contribution that our armed forces make. And in his current role, Steve is the civilian aide to the Secretary of our Army. It is a very significant role. We call it the CASA. And I found out Colonel, that when he got this role, he was elevated to the role of a general. So we always have to salute Steve now. So Steve will there. But Steve called me up the other day and said, Mike, you know, you've got to see and learn a little bit more about what's going on in McCormick Place. You know, obviously everyone has been watching the news and the TV with, you know, what they did at the Jacobs Center in New York. And, you know, Chicago has been in the process of standing up McCormick Place. And Steve said, you know, we have Colonel Aaron Reisinger, and he has done a fabulous job. And I'd like to just have you go to your friends and, you know, since you're all about supply chain and logistics, help them understand the incredible effort and the logistics effort that's been expended to create this emergency care facility. So Steve, I'd like to introduce you formally to the audience, and then perhaps you could set it up and introduce the Colonel, and we'll begin our interview.
Thanks, Mike. It's a great privilege to be here. And on behalf of the Secretary of the Army, we're glad you all are dialing in, because this is a great opportunity for you to get to know the Army and one of its crown jewels, the Army Corps of Engineers, which does so much, and most people don't realize what they do. If you think back 90 days ago, there was really no talk about the COVID virus. I was looking at some articles and what's happened in the last 90 days and the needs, the fear, the hospitalization, whatnot. From the get-go, the Army did basically from 0 to 100 in no time. Colonel Reisinger is in charge of the Chicago District. He's the man that put together in very short time the hospital that's been built within McCormick Place here, the Convention Center. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Mike, and the Colonel, and I'm going to get out of the way and let you tell the story, because it's unbelievable.
Well, Colonel, listen, we're really honored to have you here, and we're anxious to hear the story about how do you conceive something and go, you know, within 30 days. And as I mentioned to you before everyone joined the call, I was not aware of what a crown jewel the Army Corps of Engineers is. And one housekeeping item before we do get started, and that is for those of you that have questions, you can use the chat function, and we will get those questions asked. And if you can, just if you want to raise your hand to let me know ahead of time as well, we can make that happen. So, you know, Colonel, if you could walk us through, how did this all get started? What do you do? Where do you go? How do you begin? Walk us through, because I'm really, from a logistics and supply chain perspective, I'm anxious to hear about how this gets done.
Well, hey, thank you, Mike. Can you hear me okay?
You're perfect.
Hey, so Mike and Steve, I really appreciate the opportunity, and appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion and really tell the story about really not just the Corps of Engineers, but the whole of government, our federal, state, local partners working really hand in hand with the private sector to deliver this. It's been an incredible 30 days of real effort across the board. I call it our 30 days of being relentless, because it really has been 30 days of being relentless to get this done. For a little bit of context, for those in the audience who may not know this, so the Army Corps of Engineers has been really around as long as the Army has been. We're about 37,000, 38,000 people strong right now. Most of those are Department of the Army civilians. There are about 800 uniformed service members serving within the Corps of Engineers. And really, the Corps of Engineers, you know, was really we were the nation's first engineers. Mostly products of West Point, back when it was first getting up and running, and really helped to establish the nation's infrastructure from the beginning. And so, you know, a lot of people will ask, well, why is the Army Corps of Engineers everywhere? Well, the Army Corps of Engineers were the nation's first engineers, and they were the ones that built the inland waterway system many of the protective features that help the nation expand from the beginning. So it's an honor to speak on behalf of Lieutenant General Semonite, the Chief of Engineers, Major General Whittle, my division commander, about what we did here. Hey, I have a whole bunch of slides here. I sort of intend to really breeze through these and hit the top of the wave so we can get to some discussion through this. And I think just in ease of the virtual environment here, I'll try to get through this and then allow opportunity to go back as folks would like to talk. But, you know, again, really, it's you know, and I hope you can see the slides there up in front of us, but it's, you know, I call this, it's the 30 days of being relentless. And it's the Chicago District Army Corps of Engineers response to the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. If you can go to the next slide, these are just some numbers. You know, and I really 30 days ago, nobody knew what an alternate care facility was, an alternate care site was. This is something that emerged really quickly as the threat of the COVID pandemic became very clear in terms of what the forecasts were showing. A whole lot of work has been done over 30 days. We've done about $153 million worth of construction in that period of time, and some of it's still ongoing. We're finishing up this week on all our facilities. But the bottom line, if you go down to the bottom there, you know, we're going to have constructed about 5,000 COVID-19 patient spaces in less than 30 days. That's 5 different projects, 4 projects here in and around Chicago.
5,000?
5,000 total. So 5,000 total COVID spaces. Now that's just not the McCormick Place. There's 3,000 here at McCormick Place, about 550 up in MILWAUKEE, and then about 1,250 to 1,400 in 3 additional hospitals that we're currently rebuilding in the greater Chicagoland area, in the surrounding area. So we have a total of 5 construction projects ongoing to include McCormick Place. Now McCormick Place is by far the biggest. It's not only the biggest here in Chicagoland, it's the biggest in the nation with the most sophisticated capacity in terms of being able to treat more moderate acute patients, with 750 patient spaces constructed to be able to provide inline oxygen, vacuum, and medical air as required for those patients. If we go to the next slide, really this just depicts the problem. 30 days ago was my first day in Springfield, Illinois, trying to define what the problem set was we were trying to address. As anybody that's in any business knows, that if you can't establish what the objective is, you're kind of just wandering aimlessly. Well, it was really tough about 30 days ago because the forecasts were all over the place with what is going to be the challenge facing really the state of Illinois initially. The state of Illinois at that point was watching what was happening in Italy and what was happening in New York City, and we felt probably a week to 2 weeks behind New York City in terms of the scale of the problem. So there was an incredible sense of urgency. And if you just go down there to 23 March, 2 days, will be 30 days ago here in 2 days, that's when we identified the potential need of about 10,000 high acute bed spaces. Those are typically ICU type capacity, and then 28,000 low to moderate acute beds required for the number of people that were forecasted to become require hospitalization to some level. The forecast at that point were about 20% of people that would be infected would require some level of hospitalization, and the worst case was about 5% of the total would require some level of high acute medical care, ICU type care. So you can see the you know, really, and then we felt the top of the curve was around the 24th of April. Well, at that point in time, we were extremely short those number of beds. So there was an incredible sense of urgency to try to construct as much capacity as possible. And one of the challenges, you know, in this is, you know, you had to start making decisions about constructing a facility before you had all the answers on supply, staff, and really clear patient numbers. Had we waited till we knew what we really had or needed, we would have never had time to construct the capacity that we did, given even the small amount of time that we had. Go to the next slide. So the Corps of Engineers had going in a relatively well-defined scope in our role. And it's important for everybody to understand, you know, we act and we respond on behalf of FEMA. So FEMA directs us under the national emergency to execute support to infrastructure, really engineer support under what we call Emergency Support Function 3 to FEMA. So FEMA gives us our mission. So FEMA's a little bit like Congress in emergency. They give us our authorization and our appropriation, and then we go execute exactly what FEMA tells us to do. But there's a phase to this, and the phases here really is, you got to cite a location, and that's largely the responsibility of the state. So the state of Illinois identified locations. We did help support with survey work. We build it, and that's the Corps' role. So we would then use our contracting arm to contract with general contractors and then construct the facilities, and that's what we're doing here in McCormick Place now. And then other agencies, either fed, state, or local, are responsible for the supply and the staffing. So, I like to tell people, we're building you a house, right? We're going to build you a house, and we're going to give you the house. We're not putting furniture in it. We're not putting food in the refrigerator. We're not going to put kids in the bedroom. We're not going to do your yard work for you. We're just like a contractor building a house. We're going to build the house. We're going to turn the house over to you. And then other entities in the government are responsible for all the supply and staffing and operation of that facility. If we go to the next slide, under the national emergency, it really enabled rapid procurement. That's the only way we were able to get this done. The Corps, there's a lot of information here, but bottom line, we're able to award undefinitized letter contracts to general contractors that had a proven track record of being able to mobilize quickly, being able to construct medical facilities, hospitals, had a strong emergent response experience, and a lot of design build experience. The ability basically to bring forth the best possible capacity in our private sector from a construction, both a GC and a sub capacity. And that really, to be honest with you, is how we've gotten this done. If we skip forward to the next slide, these really this is McCormick Place. There's a lot of information on here. Just so everybody, a top point here is we had a rough order of magnitude starting off here at McCormick Place of about $26 million. It ended up being $65 million, highlighted in yellow there, construction effort total. And that largely had to do with significant scope changes as we got into this and understood more about what we needed to produce to be able to provide the healthcare workers with the level of medical facility necessary to treat the COVID patients. The real cost drivers here are the medical gas systems that had to be employed, and then creating the negative pressure systems, both in the isolation pods and in the rooms, the HVAC systems that had to be constructed here to support that. If you go to the next slide, you can see some of the complexity in the upper left there is the oxygen tank farm. It's a massive oxygen tank farm. It's designed to provide up to 750 patients a constant feed of 4 liters per minute. So there's a primary and alternate tank there. You can see on the bottom left there, this is one of our high acute beds. That's a HEPA filter system to the left. And then our general contractor, Walsh Construction, that did the build here, they had their manufacturer manufacture those headboards there on the right, specifically for this project. And those headboards provided both the primary and emergency power outlets, and then also the 3 med gases, med, air, oxygen, and vacuum necessary. If you look over to the right there, you can see the complex med gas systems, the copper piping. We probably bought every piece of medical copper pipe in all of Chicagoland to support our builds. I know we hired every single medically certified medical copper brazier that was available probably in all of Illinois and Wisconsin to do the brazing and the connection of all those lines. So it was a massive effort, if you can imagine doing that to 750 individual tents. There's not a hospital in the world that services 750 people to the scale that we created there. You go to the next slide. Yeah, there on the right, that just shows that's one of the isolation pods connected to the central exhaust system. So each of those tents exhausts through a HEPA filter to a central system. Then and then the whole facility there on the left is in groups of pods, and those then exhaust through a fan system to the exterior of the building. But everything we're pushing out of the building has been gone through a HEPA filter, and so is extremely clean. Go to the next slide. Now, we also received 3 mission assignment task orders from FEMA to rebuild 3 closed hospitals. So there were 3 hospitals in the greater Chicagoland area that had been closed from anywhere from a few months to many, many years. And the state strategy was to use the alternate care facility here in McCormick, the arena to healthcare option, if you will, to bridge the gap, like the near-term gap. That was a way we could come in and really in a matter of days create capacity here in the convention center. The more long-term strategy was to bring back online old hospitals that had been shut down. And largely when you think about it, they just have the right bones necessary to provide a more durable solution long-term to the state. So while we simultaneously started McCormick Place, creating 3,000 bed capacity here, one of the hospitals we also started was out in ELGIN to construct a facility out there to help manage low acute patients. We had 274 total patients out there. Go to the next slide. The ELGIN alternate care facility was really the MOB. This was the MOB of the old ELGIN Sherman Hospital. MOB is medical office building. So it was a lot of outpatient care and a lot of administrative office space. It required pretty much a complete gut. You can see on the left, this is about, I think the total square feet of this place, about 365,000 square feet. So if you can imagine remodeling a 365,000 square foot house in less than 3 weeks, going through every MEP system that exists, ripping out the guts of the entire, you can see on the upper left there, it's hard to tell there, that was all administrative offices there. All the walls were ripped out, the ceilings ripped out, a lot of new HVAC, a lot of new fire protection, a lot of new electrical. You can see then the pictures in the center, sort of what the final product is emerging to be. But it's just an amazing effort out there, and a complete total rehab, and really a lot of value created. I mean, we had air handling units, pump systems, different systems out there that hadn't really run in years, and our mechanical subs were able to go in and rehabilitate many of those and make them operational for the period, for the purposes that were necessary here. Go next slide. So the next one, Metro South, on the south side, it's very similar. This hospital had only closed about 4 to 5 months ago, maybe about 6 months ago now on the south side. Incredible capacity there. We took a hospital that originally could service 314 patients, and we are just completing it this week. We're going to turn it over on Thursday, but it'll have a total patient capacity of 585 spaces. That includes 265 high acute patients. So that's a facility that technically is replicating 265 ICU rooms for high acute patients. These are patients that would have to be on a ventilator system and require all the necessary power, backup power, med air, vacuum, and oxygen for a high volume of usage. And 240 moderate acute. So those are rooms that all have vacuum and inline oxygen. So really an incredible, durable capacity there created in less than 3 weeks. In fact, we kicked this project off 3 weeks ago yesterday, and our GC there finished all significant construction Sunday night. We're doing walkthroughs and punch out items, but a complete rehab on a facility that had extensive deferred maintenance over the past few years as it struggled financially. Go to the next slide. Two things in the upper left is to highlight, and these were a dominant issue in every facility. In the upper left there, we're showing an individualized air handling unit there that cycles the air in that room 12 times per hour through a HEPA filter system and then exhausts it outside the building. So two things happening there, what we're trying to do. Number one, we could recycle the air internal to that room if we recycled it 12 times per hour through a HEPA system. But we would be unable to create the negative pressure necessary given the bones of that building. And so what we did is we're really killing two birds with one stone there. That system there allows us to filter the air effectively up to 12 times per hour and then create a negative pressure system in that room such that we're pulling the air out of the room and cleaning it, and then spitting it out of the building. And the intent there, again, is to help protect the healthcare workers dominantly from any risk. And then the center picture there is another picture of an oxygen tank going in. So for the patients, it's oxygen. For the healthcare workers, it's negative pressure to try to remove all those contaminants out of the air as quickly as possible. So those are the two things in every facility we're working hard to achieve. Go to the next slide. So the next one is Westlake Hospital. It's out in the western suburbs of Chicago. Another great capacity. It's been shut down since August of 2019. Huge facility, over 800,000 square feet. We're not rehabilitating all of it. We are really down to the wire here. This contract was awarded a week later than the other one, so really less than 3 weeks to do a major rehabilitation for all the systems there. Extremely complicated. Again, a lot of deferred maintenance in these facilities. A final capacity of about 440 rooms. We did have some options to up that, but we were running out of time, and so we did not execute those options and are going with the base capacity we had there is 440 rooms. But very similar challenges. If you go to the next slide. Really here, Westlake didn't have as good of bones as the Metro South Hospital had, and so you can see in the upper left there, we're really bringing in oxygen and vacuum far more expeditionary, or from an expeditionary perspective. We're just getting it in there as quickly as we can. You can see the flex hoses coming into those to those outlets. And then in the center picture, a different method for creating negative pressure. We're using the exact existing exhaust systems in each room, and the way we're balancing the HVAC systems, allowing us then to pull more air out of the room than is pull the air up through that exhaust system more effectively to create a negative pressure. And then you know over on the right there, just to give us a depiction, I think this shift here, I can't remember, 200 and some odd. It shows the number of contractors working in their first shift at one time. But just, I mean, all of these facilities had just an incredible number of tradesmen and women and contractors working right on top of, you watch that final 24 hours of home makeover shows, and that's what these places look like for 30 days straight. And then the last project, if you go to the next slide, the Wisconsin State Fair Alternate Care Facility. We just completed and turned over that project on Saturday, 530 spaces. Really incredible, from zero to complete in less than 10 days. Less than 10 days. We awarded the contract. We met at 10 o'clock. We met at 8 o'clock in the morning. We awarded the contract at 10 o'clock the night before. 8 o'clock, we met with all the stakeholders, with the general contractor. We did an initial scope meeting. You got to remember, coming into these, we don't really know what the scope is. We're sort of in the process of developing the scope as we go with the contractor, with a fully integrated team. And so by 3 o'clock that afternoon, they were constructing and done, complete, with very extensive, really here, a lot of really cool infrastructure. We built this place to be able to manage ADA requirements far more so than we did any other facility. So really extensive ADA bathrooms and showers constructed, and then 330 rooms with inline oxygen capability. And again, another, if you go to the next slide, you see some pictures. But really cool here. So those partitions there on the left, those partitions that we used at McCormick Place were sort of the typical convention center partitions that you would see at a job fair or whatever. Well, by the time we got to the Milwaukee Expo Center, there was nothing left in the supply chain anywhere for those convention cubes. So these partitions, there was a local millwork there in Milwaukee. We mobilized at 8 o'clock in the morning, and by 4 or 5 o'clock that afternoon, they had their order, and they were constructing these in their mill and then bringing them in. And within 3 days, we had 530 of these installed, completed, ready to receive the other infrastructure, all the copper and electrical and stuff. So just amazing response from local manufacturers, local millworks to support those things. In the bottom there, that second picture from the left, that's a nurse station. Gilbane, a building company up in Milwaukee, built those on site. But a millwork here in Chicago built all of them for the McCormick Place. Those were all brought in modular sets, and we were able to construct them on site. The benefit of that was, number one, they were working in a controlled environment in their current millworks. And we also then prevented the number of people that were on the floor to help protect against COVID-19 threats with the workforce, right? That was always a challenge. You got to remember, we're doing all of this in a COVID-19 environment where everybody is really taking some personal risk, even showing up to work and working around. You got to remember thousands and thousands of people working each shift, each night. So really, really incredible effort. And then top picture there, you can see again another oxygen tank farm going in, and a lot of really cool activity. But yeah, from zero to complete in less than 10 days, 530 with all wraparound services, all those things, bathrooms, ADA showers, ADA bathrooms, exhaust systems, pretty amazing. Inline oxygen throughout. If you go to the next slide. I can leave this up and we can take questions from here. I mean, really, as I described, lessons learned. We had to plan with a lot of high level uncertainty and really with no time. So we had to make a lot of planning assumptions and move. We know far more about how to deal with COVID-19 today than we did 30 days ago. So it's been a learning process, and anybody that's been in construction knows nobody who's building things likes to have a lot of moving targets when it comes to scope. We had to deal with a lot of moving targets on scope. Because it was really hard to nail down what the medical community really needed, what type of patients we would be treating, what level of acuity. And really, we still to this day we have 5 facilities that are all built to deal with different consumption levels of oxygen. Well, you have to nail down what your oxygen consumption rates are in order to design all your distribution systems and design your tank farms and things like that. Number 2, we really succeeded because we had fully integrated project delivery teams from the start. This isn't something the Army Corps of Engineers generally does. We're usually a design, bid, build organization. We don't fully integrate early on in the process. We had no options other than to fully integrate. And I mean fully integrate the clients, the managers, the builders, the subcontractors, the Corps. You consider the Corps, we're sort of like an owner's rep to the federal government. And that's really what our job is once we get into construction. As an owner's rep to ensure the general contractor delivers. We administer the contracts, we let those contracts out, and then we administer them, and then we make sure the government gets what they're paying for, what we're paying for. But we're fully integrated, extremely flat, people making decisions at the table that we're not comfortable making decisions. But that's one thing I think the Corps had the benefit of as a convening authority with the state, the cities, the counties, the medical community, general contractors, subcontractors. The one thing that we're really good at is we're good at driving decision making, and that was incredibly important here to drive decision making so we didn't stall progress. Some of those decisions were wrong, and in hindsight we'll work through those and understand it, but a lot of them was based on the information available at that time. Third one there is in order to get moved here, you had to delegate and underwrite those to make who were making decisions. We had nurses and doctors sitting at the table needing to make decisions for hospital executives, and I didn't let them go back and ask. I said, we need decisions now, and that's what we were moving out with, because we were constructing what they wanted within hours of them making a decision. Our delivery method allowed us, number 4 there, our delivery method allowed us to deliver with unprecedented speed and allowed general contractors to take a lot of initiative. I didn't belabor the point, but in our procurement and our delivery strategy here, the firms that were ultimately selected were firms that had a proven history of constructing hospitals, medical facilities. They were firms that had a proven history of being able to mobilize capacity really quickly, and the ability to bring to bear the best subcontractors that we could get. And they all, in bullet 5 there, everybody brought their A teams to the table, whether it was hospital executives, doctors, nurses, the facility managers, our general contractors, our subs. I mean, it was so awesome. You didn't get like the project manager for a sub. You got the president of the company sitting at the table because this was so important. And so, this mission, the Corps didn't bring these people to the table. The mission brought the A team to the table, and that's how we were able to get things done. And that's sort of my final point. I would tell you that the Corps, I was thoroughly impressed. I learned, if there's anything I learned a lot of things, but there's one thing I learned, that these general contractors are good because they have the best procurement people in the world. They know how to go find and get things. And that was a really challenging thing in this environment. There's really one manufacturer of med gas systems in America, and it's a Rock Hill, South Carolina. Most of the stuff is made. our med gas compressors, our vacuums, our dryers, all those things. And you can imagine the disruption in the supply chain that constructing these many facilities. I mean, I'm just one district of many that are doing this across the nation now. And so a lot of disruption in the supply chain in terms of the demand we created on these specialty items. And these procurement officers working for these logistics officers working for these different general contractors were amazing at coming up with innovative solutions and different sourcing solutions, if you will, on many of these products that were in short supply. If you go to the last slide. Hey, in the end, integrated delivery team, these pictures just really depict integrated delivery process. These were all day one scope meetings where everybody was at the table and everybody was there wide-eyed, trying to understand the scale, scope, complexity, and the time constraints that we were dealing with, and what the heck was in the art of the possible to get done in the amount of time. But yeah, in the end, so 30 days ago today was my first meeting in Springfield. In 2 days, it will be 30 days since we identified the demand. In about 5 days from now, it will be 30 days since we awarded our first contract. And by Saturday, we'll be complete turned over on all 5 projects, nearly 5,000. I think the actual final number, if I remember right, it's going to be 4,833 patient bed spaces, because we had some just supply chain and scope changes here in the last minute, a couple facilities that reduced our numbers slightly. But I'm going to claim 5,000 because that's what we planned for, and it's a cleaner number. That was probably a little bit longer than I intended to brief, but there's just so much great information there to get through and to describe the scope. I'm willing to take any questions and take as much time as we want to take, sir.
Okay, well, listen, first of all, thank you very, very much, Colonel. I may be the only one here, but I'm flabbergasted. If you had told me that our government could move this quick, I would have said this was Adventures in Fantasyland, and it would have been impossible to mobilize that. So a couple of questions that have come in. First of all, the total cost you said was $65 million. Was that $65 million for all 5 facilities, or just McCormick Place?
So that $65 million is the definitized contract amount for McCormick Place alone. We are authorized, well, really, I guess we are funded up to $153 million total for all 5 facilities. I'm not sure what that final number is going to come out. It's going to be somewhere between probably 140 and 153 final numbers once we account for all contracts, all final modifications that we're working through, and then labor and other costs. But 153 is the top line. Okay, so then another question that came up there, is somebody had asked me ahead of time, the Army stood up the Javits Center in New York, and were there things that you learned, because they were, I think, about a week and a half ahead of you? Were there things that you learned from that experience that you were able to put into effect in getting these 5 facilities in Chicago and Wisconsin? Yeah, no, absolutely. The first thing we learned about the Javits Center was initially scoped to be a non-COVID facility. So it was going to take non-COVID patients out of the hospital network and put them in the Javits Center to help free up space in the existing hospital network. That became, what we realized is that was not possible, because you could not put 2,000 people under the same roof and assume it was COVID free. So we went in with the first assumption that we were only going to be able to, our plan was to create facilities that could treat COVID-19 patients. So that drove a lot of things like oxygen requirements, negative pressure requirements, other infrastructure requirements that were never an initial scope requirement for the Javits Center. So both in terms of, that was probably the dominant thing we learned from Javits, is that and actually the Javits Center has now evolved to being COVID, and they've had to add a lot of infrastructure to that facility over time. But that was really the dominant decision that we drew out of the Javits Center. Okay, so there's another question that came in, and this is a great question. It says, how did you manage the process of making decisions on the fly without all the information available? People are usually reluctant to proceed without a clear vision. Yeah, well, we had a clear vision. We had 5,000 bed spaces by April 24th, and if anything that was getting in our way of that, it was my job to get it out of the way or to solve it. So, if there's, there's probably only one thing that I was really good at through this is helping to drive decision making in uncertainty. And, and that's, I think, part of our military experience, we were so used to being put and needing to operate in environments where you lack all the information you need to make clear decisions, that you have to trust the instincts of the experts around you. I would say that, while our time was short in execution, somebody said this best in our lessons learned discussion in Milwaukee. We didn't get Milwaukee done in 10 days. We got Milwaukee done in 25 years plus 10 days.
Wow.
Because everybody there had been doing this for so long. They knew how to turn it on when they had to turn it on, right? We weren't taking amateurs off the street and doing this. We were dealing with folks that had been building hospitals for decades. And we had clinicians that had been treating patients for decades. And so, it's a little bit like I would just acknowledge it's a highly trained military unit. When you train, when it's time comes to execute, all that training just starts happening. And when you're under the gun and you're mission and outcome focused, it's amazing what you can get done. And so to get back to your question on decision making and uncertainty, everybody was, trust me, I think all of us lost a lot of sleep committing the amount of resources and time and effort to a problem set we didn't clearly understand. But we knew we had to make decisions and move in order to create any capacity, to create the confidence that we needed. And some of this was really about creating confidence in the community, so the communities could see that we could react and get things done and respond to this crisis. And that was a real driving factor for us.
Okay, so we're honored to have Kathy Fulton with the American Logistics Aid Network. Alan does phenomenal work, and we've also been honored to have some people from CSCMP and NASTRAC on the call, in addition to our TranzAct folks. And, I guess one of the things that, Kathy has done a great job. They move, mobilize people from all over the place to direct resources when there is a crisis, a hurricane, whatever, call it what you will. But, is there, beyond the takeaways that you learned here, are there other tips that you could provide to organizations where they have to mobilize disparate parties? I mean, you're dealing with different cultures, different value systems, how do you get everyone under one umbrella and get them focused to get the kind of results that you got in 10 days? I'm still shocked, to tell you the truth. I think of government and bureaucracy in 10 days. But how do you meld people coming together with, disparate parties?
Well, when you put the level of threat in front of people who feel responsible for addressing that threat, all those challenges you have with, I think, in a day-to-day basis, getting things done, they go away. I mean, we had just, you can't even fathom how many different tradesmen we had working on the same floor. And if this were a typical construction project, the plumbers don't get along with the electricians. They don't get along with the carpenters. They don't get along with the pipe fitters. They don't get along. Those folks just, there's a natural tension. Everybody was mission focused here. And everybody was sort of really willing to accept compromise. Nobody came in. I didn't deal with a single person that came in dogmatic about their position or that they had to have something. It was what's the best we can do in the time we have, and let's move out. So I think, that's first and foremost. The mission drove people, unlike it's probably driven, I'm sure profit motivates people, but when you're worried, when you're thinking you're going to save people's life and maybe saving your own family's life, people start to work well together. The other thing that was interesting, just in terms of emergency response, is, usually we have a crisis that happens in a certain portion of America, right? You have a major hurricane, a major flood, a major tornado. This was a national problem. You could not draw upon resources. I couldn't get support from other portions of the country because everybody was trying to deal with their own problems. So just from a national response perspective, we were really all had to be pretty largely self-dependent upon our own capabilities.
Kathy, perhaps if you could unmute. Kathy is the head of American Logistics Aid Network. She had an interesting comment here. It says people take off their competitor hats and put on a common jersey to fight the enemy there. Kathy, could you share your thoughts there about that?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Colonel, I appreciate everything that you guys have done, and I have the privilege of working alongside FEMA and some other activities to recognize the one team mentality that you refer to as people coordinate across the ESF functions. And so I think that being able to, what Alan does is extend that across, not just the federal coordination activities, but also out to the business community in a non-contractual way. So amazing work that you guys have done, have been watching from afar down in Florida. And so I appreciate the support that you're providing our communities.
Well, thank you.
A good question that somebody else asked me ahead of time if they couldn't join the call. Okay, so, thank God it appears that the models erred on the high side. And so the enormous capacity that you've built may not have to be utilized, okay? So the question that this person was wondering is, A, how long do you stand up a McCormick Place? B, you've got 4 other facilities, the Wisconsin State Fairs, the South Side, or et cetera. What happens to those when, Lord willing, the threat of the coronavirus dissipates?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I mean, it's something I know the state and the local communities are trying to work through right now. The forecasts look very different than they looked 30 days ago. And so, there are discussions about, what do they do with the facilities? What do they do with this investment? One of the things to just keep in mind is, these alternate care facilities are constructed under emergency conditions and do not require the typical licensing commissioning that a hospital would. The day that the national health emergency is over, these facilities can no longer be operated as a health facility. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. These are only, you can only operate these unlicensed, uncommissioned during the national health emergency. One of the discussions we're having is, we've invested a lot in infrastructure capability here, and the Engineer Research and Development Lab is sending some folks, Huntsville sending some folks up here tomorrow, and we're going to look at how do we take these packages and package these things. Maybe we put them in deployable containers. We seal them and we package these things away so we have pop out systems that we can reemploy. Maybe we take them out of a convention center and find a large warehouse that we can just put them up and permanently maintain the capacity there. These convention centers were selected because they have incredible wraparound capability. The infrastructure is in the floor, and so they were really ready-made. To service the patient load here. But McCormick Place is a massive economic driver for the city of Chicago, and I know the city and the state and the community cannot afford for this place to be tied down as an alternate care facility for the long term. And so they're working through sort of what those challenges are. In terms of the other facilities, the more long-term durable solution, frankly, are these other hospitals that we put a huge infusion of cash. We did a lot of work. We brought these facilities up to functioning capability. It wouldn't take the state a lot to potentially get these facilities relicensed, permitted to operate as a medical facility. If they wanted to hold them in reserve, kind of keep them on a warm status. I know in the state right now is looking at a phased approach to both equip and staff these facilities based on the existing threat. But it's a great question. And I think it's really being driven right now on forecasting for what will happen through the summer and the fall. As everybody has heard on the news, there's a growing fear or potential risk associated with the resurgence of the flu season next fall. Will we need this capacity? How fast do we bring it down? I think what we've really learned, though, is we responded to a massive surge requirement very quickly. But I think what we've learned is what we want to figure out is how do we take this capacity, make it modular, and plug it into the existing hospital more easily. What we really need to do is be able to take an existing advanced care center, if you will, and add the capacity there where you have access to staff, you have access to labs, x-rays, MRIs, a supply chain that already exists. This solution set met an emerging need that looked huge But in the future, I think what we're looking for is more smaller sets that we can help expand existing hospital capacity locally versus a large center like this. It is extremely expensive. Anybody that's in the healthcare business knows how expensive it is to turn on this facility with staff, equipment, medicine, food, garments, clean, dirty, health, sanitation, everything. It is, the costs are extraordinary.
Well, that leads my, two other aspects. There's the infrastructure associated with getting the facility stood up. Then there's the infrastructure associated with operating that. Okay. To what extent has the Army Corps been involved in the ongoing daily operational aspects of those facilities?
So, FEMA's authorization and task to us tells us to build it. We have no authority or funding to operate, maintain, or demobilize the facility. That would be the responsibility of the partner. In this case, here in Illinois, would be the state of Illinois or the city of Chicago. And so, theoretically, the way this works is it's 75-25 cost share. So the construction is 75 fed, 25 non-fed. So really, the state and the city receive the investment for 25 cents on the dollar. It is their asset. So it's I don't want to call it a gift, but it's basically, it's a federal asset, a federal cash infusion to construct this asset that now belongs to the state. It's for the state to use as they see fit. That's the construction. Operation, maintenance, and demob is completely the responsibility of the state. And so
Heaven help us all.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I should say that, but I think most of it, a large portion of it, is reimbursable by the federal government through the emergency, the national emergency. But that takes a reimbursement process and applications up through FEMA that I don't understand completely. What I do understand is the Corps' role ends Friday here at McCormick when I hand the keys of the house over to the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois.
Okay, so one other area that I'm just kind of curious. You've got, I see some friends of mine from YPO on the call here, and, running organizations, and, as you're going through this, once again, I'm almost flabbergasted to hear what you've achieved in the span of 30 days. I didn't think it was possible for the government to let a contract within a month, let alone an hour, as you described. So what you're really talking about, from what I have heard, is the art of the possible. What happens, Kathy said we take off our competitor hats, put out a common jersey. So for the folks that are working in organizations that are confronting what seem like monumental tasks, any words of encouragement about facilitating the art of the possible?
It's getting the best people at the table as you possibly can find, and the big difference here is the Corps. Had I had this mission, typically we would have probably taken 18 months of doing a feasibility study. We probably would have.
That's the government we know. That's the government we know.
Building hospitals are no small endeavor, but and then we would have waited for appropriations to construct something, and then we would have done some design work and let a contract. So these things, I deal with. Most of my work is really large capital investment civil works projects. So major, $100 million plus large civil works projects, levee systems, inland waterway, dams, levees, flood control works, things like that. But really, if you get outcome-focused people at the table who are incentivized for the right reasons, you can move mountains. And I think I wouldn't want to, you got to have those people, and I wouldn't want to undersell the importance of having leaders at that table that know how to convene that, motivate it, and frankly drive it when it needs to be driven.
Okay, so then one final question from my end here, and you've been very gracious with your time. How many members of the armed forces were involved in these, in the build? You're talking about the tradesmen. If you had the delineation, you're talking all that copper pipe and mobilizing all the people that could do the welds, et cetera. At the end of the day, what were we looking at for a total workforce?
Well, so when the way we construct is all through contracts. So there were no military uniform members building anything here. It was all through contracts with private partners, through general contractors, subcontractors, and then the skilled labor. The Illinois National Guard has been supporting the city and the state here, helping to move in equipment, managing supplies and things like that, but more from a wraparound service perspective. And so you asked me the question before. The other thing I would say in terms of, we call them wraparound. It's all those other things that have to happen to operate a facility. What we really did is we helped integrate that, because we knew through the process you couldn't just stop construction and then transition to the next phase. You had to be working all those things simultaneously. And so we worked closely with the Illinois Guard on sequencing the delivery of supply and equipment to move it into these facilities, and then with the healthcare providers on when we were going to have oxygen capable, when we were going to have pharmacies set up, nurse stations, the networks. I mean, these are fully capable facilities. The nurses and doctors have access to the same networks that they would have back in an advanced acute center. So I'm straying off your question.
But, you know, if I can interrupt, you know, I'm taking a look at like restrooms, the restrooms at McCormick Place, you know, standing up, you know, adequate facilities there. You're talking about things like Walsh designing that headboard for a bed, doing it in a day. Who was the firm out of Milwaukee? I want to plug them as well. Who was that firm that did all the partitions?
You know, I'd have to go back and look. Gilbane Building Company was our general contractor in Milwaukee, specifically. You know, we've our contractors, and just for clarification, we contracted through the McCormick Place itself here because of the current agreements McCormick Place has with the local trade unions. The Corps cannot have a contract that stipulates use of trade unions only, so we contracted through McCormick Place, and their general contractor was Walsh, but we're working with Walsh, Turner Construction, Clark Construction, Bully Andrews, and Gilbane, all very, very well-known, well-established.
They did a great job. They did an absolutely fabulous job. Listen, as we close out here, and anything that I, you know, potentially could have asked or should have asked, and then before we close, Gail, I want to thank NASTRAC and CSCMP and Alan for their support on this. Anything else that we could have or should have asked, or closing thoughts for us, Colonel?
Well, I mean, no, I think the message I like to send on all of this is it's when we put our minds to it and we're focused and we get the right people to the table, we can really accomplish a lot. And it really goes to show that if you put aside some of your strong beliefs and things and how things should be built or whatever, and you negotiate, compromise, and are willing to work together, you can get a lot done. And I think we proved it by, we're proving it here in less than 30 days, constructing spaces for up to 5,000 patients here in Chicagoland and Milwaukee.
Well, listen, on behalf of the entire group here and on behalf of the citizens of Chicago and Illinois and the Midwest, I just want to say thank you very much for your dedicated service and opening our eyes to the art of the possible and standing up 5,000 beds. I wouldn't have thunk it, but you've done it, and I want to commend you and congratulate you. So thank you very much.
I appreciate that, Mike. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to this crowd. It's great.
Okay, folks, thanks, and we'll have a recording available for you if you want to share it with everyone. And so we'll go from here, and let's get this coronavirus behind us. Okay.
That's right.
Have a great day.
Thank you.